seeing what instant difference I could make on somebody by giving them a plate of food. That was a realization for me that was something what I wanted to do. Seeing that face of happiness and satisfaction and enjoyment of people on the table.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. There have been many people who started careers in other fields but were drawn to hospitality and made a real success of it. What role does tourism have on an increased interest in food for those that find a new career in hospitality? Julian Velasquez is the chef and co-owner of Estanco in South Australia. Julian, how are you going?
Yes, very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
You built quite a huge career away from food for many years. What was it that drew you to hospitality?
Well, I guess mainly that desire to give to people. It's just, products. I grew up with that family orientation where I used to cook Christmas dinners at home for my family when I was not even near being in the hospitality industry. But that always was part of who we were. Just the cooking and the sharing.
You're originally from Colombia. Take us back to when you were young. What was food like in your family in Colombia?
Well, it was very different to what is here, but very good. So it was a sharing thing for us. I learned a lot from my grandmother, which I still put into practice till this day. But she always used to cook for us as a family. We had a small farm as well, so my father used to cook for us. One thing that I always remember is even if we were 5 on the table, there was always 6, 7 portions put on for whoever just rocked in. For the forester, he used to say. It was always about that sharing and about that, using stuff from the land. So most of the meals at the farm was just things that we raise or produce, with the vegetables or livestock. So it was always part of my life, even though I was planning to go into a completely different field like politics and economics rather than cooking and hospitality.
Is there any feasts or dishes that you can tell us about that you have fond memories of from your youth?
Yes, I think one of the things that bring a lot of memories was my father. Again, he is a mad fisherman, so we always have some sort of whole fish in the fridge, just from him bringing things up. And me as I would have been maybe 12 or something like that. One day just decided to invite my best friend for lunch and just proceeded to fillet a fish without not knowing what I was doing really. but I made it happen and just create a fish with cheese and gratinated, and it was really good. But it's something that was always there, part of what can I do to make things tasty. As I say, as a little kid, I was always playing in the kitchen with my mom or my grandmother, with the pots and frying pans where they was just doing their jobs around.
You studied politics and international relations at university, but you set off on an adventure and travelled around the world. And tell us about what that experience was like and what the different food cultures were and what impact they had on you.
Oh, that was huge. That was huge. So when I finished school in Colombia, it was always that willing to travel and experience. That was always part of me. And luckily, my parents encouraged that quite a lot. So I moved to the UK when I was 18. And well, as you may realize, well, coming from Colombia to a place like England will just open a completely different window to be exposed to different cultures like Indian food, Asian food, even, well, British cuisine. I live with a family there, so I was having meals with them every night. So that brought my horizons quite a lot in terms of cultures. I went back to Colombia after 1 year, and then is when I started studying politics and international relations. But in the meantime, I've got myself a job in a hotel in Colombia as a concierge. And it's funny, I was always drawn to the kitchen. I became a pretty good friend with the chef, and found it fascinating what we do in the kitchen all the time in there. Even though that, I still was determined to be a diplomat or something like that. Then I moved to Australia and studied international relations in Brisbane. But at the same time, again, I used to cook always for friends, go to the markets and buy fresh scallops and have to clean fresh scallops without never done it before. Things like that, where I put myself into those situations, but with pleasure. And I think that always taught me a lot of things. Like a lot of the things that I know from traditional cooking, I've learned them myself by reading, researching, and things like that, rather than it's so much that you can learn in school, basically, well, college.
What drew you to move to Australia and Brisbane, and what was it like when you first arrived? Were you surprised by the food culture?
Yes. That's basically surprise. Yes, it was a far away country for me, really. I remember I came the long way. I came via Europe, so it took me like 48 hours flying time to get to Australia. But never really felt in a strange place in terms of food for so many reasons. I live in my first, we'll say, 4 years with a lot of international students because of uni. And they all had their own pieces of food. So I live with a lot of Brazilians, which kept me kind of grounded to home, as we share a lot of traditional food that is quite similar, beans, stews, and things like that. Then as well, I was living with Koreans and Japanese people, so they all had their little bit of influence in that home cooking for us. We used to very often just like do one meal for all of us, and somebody was just kind of in charge of cooking. So it was a lot of sharing. It was, as I said, not on the horizon to end up in the kitchen, really. It kind of gradually happened. I remember my dad saying when I was working in the hotel back in Colombia, he did suggest for me to study hospitality and tourism instead of politics and international relations. And I said to him, nonsense, Dad, like, that's not what I want to do. and here we are. Yes, it's just, but I guess I had to find that path myself, really. The more things progresses, the more drawn to the kitchen and to the restaurant scene I was. So it became, once I finished uni in Brisbane, it became more clear for me that I needed to change. So there were not many options for me either. Well, to stay in Australia was either continue with international relations or going through cooking and becoming a chef. So yeah, at that moment it was pretty much clear, like where did I wanted to go. So I chose to go into TAFE and studying cookery.
Well, tell us about your time in Brisbane and the restaurants you worked in. What were the real key sort of moments when you were building your career as a chef?
I guess it was when we went out for a work experience. For us, it was a little bit different. As an international student back there, like you could not take an apprenticeship as such. So we had to take a full-time course of cooking for 2 years. So you didn't have that industry connection in the same way as Australians did back in then. So we just have to wait, and every 6 months we have to go for placement for 6 months. I chose to go to the best restaurants that I could find, even if there was not a good pay or no pay at all. In many places, I decided to work for free just for the experience. That was one place called Dani's back in the day, which I think it has transformed, and these days it's called Moda. It just showed me what a real kitchen was, like the stress in the kitchen, the pace, the attention for detail. I was really lucky to work with really passionate chefs. At the same time, in one of my work experience, I always went to knock doors. I did send my resumes, but I was not really waiting for them to call me back. So I used to go to the restaurant and ask to talk to the chef, introduce myself, explain them what I was doing, and all this, I guess, just opened a few more doors for me than others. I remember out of my class, we were maybe 20. As for this moment, probably 2 of us are still in the kitchen or doing cooking. The rest just move on to different industries and different places. So yeah, it was. I worked with the international chefs, so French chefs, obviously Australian, Spanish, even Scottish. So that just gave me a good overview of what a real kitchen was and how mental the place is. But I love that rush, and I guess it's just like gluttony for a punishment, but it's good.
You eventually moved to Adelaide. What triggered that? And tell us about your time early on in Adelaide.
So Adelaide was, as well, I don't know if he's believe in that or not, but it kind of things were meant to be. I used to travel quite a lot to Adelaide to visit a good friend that lived with me in Brisbane. On the first years, he moved to Adelaide for studies, and I used to come and visit quite a bit, and I was always fascinated by the wine regions, especially the Barossa. I remember the first trip we made a trip to the Barossa, and it was, well, fell in love with the place straight away. That was not the reason why I moved, like initially, but circumstances changed, and I got a job offer from a restaurant in Adelaide, and a bit of an iconic place called Universal Wine Bar. And then, so yeah, decided to make the change. So just finished my job in Brisbane, and moved permanently to Adelaide. It was, well, again, chasing the products. I was quite lucky. For example, when I was working in Brisbane, we used to go through about 800 kilos of mussels a week.
Wow.
So I got sent to visit the supplier in Port Lincoln, and just visit the mussel farms. And so that was for me a realization of what kind of products you could find in this part of the world. Vegetables, meat, like lamb was coming from South Australia. Amazing wine was coming from South Australia. So that was another reason for me as well to move. And yeah, always been really keen to travel and visit new places and try new experiences. So I say, yeah, I'll do it. And I moved. Then I worked at the Universal Wine Bar for about 4 years as a head chef.
Tell us about the sort of food that you were cooking there.
That was a bit of a challenge for me, as it was the owners of the restaurant at the time were an older Italian person, which was quite interesting because he wanted me to recreate his mother's dishes back in Italy, when I didn't have any idea of what he was expecting. So it took a lot of me to read and doing research about Italian cooking and traditional cooking, and not just the usual spaghetti bolognese type of thing. Just to make him happy with what he wanted to see on the menu. I had a lot of help from his sister. So Vito, he would be maybe around 80 years old at the moment. So he's going like back long way in Italian cooking in terms of time. So his sister was a chef. She was the first female, I think, executive chef in Australia, as far as I can remember, Marie Romano. So she helped me quite a lot in order to get all this knowledge on the table, which was quite interesting. He every now and then used to arrive to work with a box of whole cuttlefish or the plaque of a pig, so the head and all the organs, for me to create dishes that were traditional and push me in that way to look past the normal things that were being offered on normal menus.
This episode is proudly supported by Montague, handpicked for you.
The things that we're really looking for in plums, first of all, they've got to be sweet. We're really looking for a full flavour explosion in our plums. Red flesh is critically important to us, higher in antioxidants, so all that good stuff. And then we're also looking to add a slightly firmer texture. So there's almost a little crunch. You know, that's the real driver for us.
For more information, go to montague.com.au.
Your love for travelling eventually led to working on the Ghan and the Indian Pacific for a couple of years. How did that gig come about, and what was it like cooking on a long journey train?
It was very interesting. It was, I would say, probably one of the best experiences of my life. again, as I said, things just kind of align. And I remember thinking when I was back in Brisbane that I wanted to do a journey on a train from Sydney to Perth. I was not really aware of the Ghan or the Indian Pacific or how they operate. And so, but that thought was on my head as a tourist. Once I finished at Universal Wine Bar, I started looking for jobs. I looked for jobs in Kangaroo Island. I looked for jobs in the mine. I had my eyes set on opening my own place then. So it was a transitional job, which I was intended to do for 6 months, and it sucked me in. And I ended up doing a little bit over 3 years. But it was amazing. So it was an experience like no other. We did cook everything to order from fresh. So it was working like an a la carte restaurant, which make it really, really challenging considering the space and the equipment that we had to work with. The teams were obviously very small, so there was only 2 chefs in each kitchen for up to 120 guests. And yeah, really, really long hours. But again, like that's something that motivates me. Like I need challenges like that in life, where I can push my limits. And yeah, so I learned a lot more as well in terms of working on confined spaces and being organized, stock supplies. Like we couldn't have things delivered every day like we do in a normal restaurant. So we needed to be very meticulous to the kind of stock that we order and how much stuff. So at the beginning, it was like opening and closing a restaurant every week. That's the way I used to put it, because we used to have to order the goods, receive them into an empty kitchen, store them, count them, see if we needed to get some extras, start cooking, and at the end of the trip was the same story. So we needed to return the train with an empty kitchen, complete clean and organized. So it was like, yeah, opening and closing a restaurant every week. It was quite interesting.
The Ghan and Indian Pacific is quite an adventure and quite an extravagant experience for those that go on board for that long form of travel. What sort of food were you cooking? Do you have a dish or two you can tell us about from that time?
Yeah, so they were having changes, like they were trying to get the menus to have the same journey as the train. So which was amazing because we were using products from the regions that we were passing to every meal. So for example, on the Ghan, as we went up, we start changing to game and using kangaroo loins, and at some point we have like a buffalo curry, crocodile tail sausages, obviously the iconic barramundi. So the menu followed the journey of the train. The same going towards Perth with the lamb. So going through the Nullarbor Plains was all about those big sheep stations. So we used to have a roast lamb dinner off the train in the middle of nowhere for the guests one of the night.
Wow.
Salt bush lamb. So yeah, it was very interesting. It was eye-opening to see how many different products and good things come from this country. The same with the cheeses. So we was changing from products from New South Wales to South Australia, Western Australia. It was amazing.
Tell me about El Estanco. When did the idea of it first come to light, and how did you pull that together?
El Estanco. That's another crazy train ride, really. So basically, that was always in the back of my mind, that I wanted to have my own place. That was the end result of being a chef. Was not becoming the executive chef of the Hilton or anything like that, but just to have my own space. I didn't really know in which shape or form, but sometimes the idea was to go back to Colombia and take over the farm and created something in the farm in the shape of a restaurant or something like that. But at some point when I finished at Universal Wine Bar, I had a visit from a winemaker that I have met through all those years of visiting the Barossa. And we were speaking and said, I'm about to finish here. And he mentioned that he had a little cottage in Greenock that his parents used to live at, and he wanted to rent it for a business, that he didn't wanted to run a business himself, but he would be happy for somebody to open a food business in there. And I said, well, this is my opportunity to jump into that goal. So I said, yes, I'll do it. From there to doing the actual restaurant, to those 3 years that I got sucked into the train. So it was a lot of back and forwards and discussions about am I going to open? It was a big leap of faith for me as well. Like, as much as I was doing good hours and getting good money on the trains, like, it was a big commitment and investment to open my own business. But yeah, at some point towards the end of those 2.5, 3 years, I said it's now or never. So I say, let's do this, let's open. I carry one of my chefs from Universal Wine Bar, and he helped me open the restaurant. I remember I opened with $300. That's all the money I had left on my pocket to go to the shops and buy a product to start cooking. This is after buying coffee machine and plates and whatnot, and all these bits and pieces. A lot of the furniture we end up doing ourselves out of pallets and things like that. And yeah, we just opened the doors, and it kind of slowly start growing from there. I had a lot of things to learn in order to get to where we are now. But it started, at least, like, we had the doors open and we were selling coffee and breakfasts, and we had an overwhelming response for the first month, which was a little bit crazy. I had in the back of my head the idea of I will still do 1 or 2 trips in the trains and then come back. It was just not, I couldn't. I needed to be there every day to make it work. And yeah, it had a very good response from the locals and people around the Barossa. And yeah, it gave the community something a little bit different to what they were used to. We brought, obviously, all those South American influence into the kitchen, and different flavors, and like a different vibe, like different style of service. Even though we were a small place to be called a cafe, we had all this experience working on fine dining restaurants and the train, and like good background to put really good meals on the plate. So I think that opened the eyes for the locals and customers of being able to go to a cafe type of establishment, but getting the quality on the plate of a restaurant. And that set us apart from a lot of the places and gave us a lot of room for growing. On that process, I met my partner, which now is my life partner and my business partner. I think that make things just go a little bit extra on what we wanted to achieve. She was a chef as well on a local restaurant in the Barossa, which was amazing because we could just bounce off each other with ideas and things. So at the nearly six months mark of having El Estanco, we had that conversation and say, well, let's join efforts and let's do this together. And then, ever since she's, the other half of El Estanco, just the two of us getting this on this journey together.
Well, tell us about how that works in the kitchen with Abby being a chef and you being a chef and you leaning into your heritage with Colombian cuisine. How does that work? How do you work together, and what sort of food are you creating there?
It has always been drawn to the South American flavors. So we have always, because of passion, and that's what we know, and that's what we want to show the rest of Australia, and the Barossa is what we have to offer. And also that just gives us that point of difference from any other place around the area, really. We do research, so that's where bits and pieces like the Italian experience with Universal Wine Bar came to play a good role. It just takes us to research for recipes and food that is not the normal South American offering that you find everywhere. For example, we do Mexican food every now and then as well. And it's all about finding ingredients, dried chilies, making sauces out of scratch of what they would do using fire, just to create that traditional from the land experience on the plate. She is all passionate about that as well. She doesn't spend as much time in the kitchen with us at the moment, as this business has grown quite a bit, that requires somebody to be at the front and on the office. But we always work really well together, bouncing ideas into what we want to see on the plate and tasting, helping each other with research and that type of things. At the moment, we're quite short of staff, so she's back in the kitchen with us, which is good. Keep me on my toes, as you can imagine. The idea of a husband and wife in the kitchen working side by side is a time bomb in a good way. It's always been our passion. Like, she grew up in in a farm. So she always had that as well, a passion for a paddock to play the type of food. And that was what I was doing when I started El Estanco. We did a lot of catering to going into vineyards and cooking for a group of 80 people just out on the paddocks. So do a whole lamp on the cross where we use only wood and fire to cook all the ingredients. So that was another side of the business that we created. We did participated into Tasting Australia a couple of years ago with an event on those lines, where we put on the plate fine dining type of food, but there is no electricity or combi oven use or gas. It's all just made on the spot with coals and fire, and that's one of my biggest passions. So when we created our second restaurant, we worked really hard to make sure we had a grill and a fire element in the kitchen, which we have now, which has allowed us to do a lot of what we like in the normal restaurant service.
You have a real focus on local producers and artisans. Is there any that you can tell us about that have been really integral with what you do?
Yes, we've always been trying to use the local guys. Until this point, eggs are being supplied from the local egg farm, if you can call it that way. The butcher, we work with the local butchers for small goods and bacon and meat, especially. So pork and beef, they come from the local producers. It's hard sometimes to maintain that restaurant continuity when produce are so limited. So that's why one of the reasons, for example, we had a blackboard menu in the first El Estanco. So it consisted of about 4 breakfast dishes and 4 lunch dishes, and they were changed every week. So let's say I used to get my hands on some local venison, which we used to buy the whole carcass and just go through it until we finish it. Whether it was doing the venison loins to start with, and then working towards the other cuts to get venison pies, venison stock. So once that was finished, that was off the menu, basically. So it was not, we need to reorder a venison to continue with this. We just work on something else. So that's how we have worked with local suppliers. The same, we go to the Barossa Farmers Market every weekend to buy fruit and veg. And yeah, as I said, pork, for example, come from one of them as well, but just distributed from the local butcher in Mount Pleasant. So yeah, it always been trying to have that relationship of them as well visiting the restaurant, eating what we have to offer. The same with the wine producers. We'll just try to keep them involved and participate with them in creating events and things like that where we can work together.
You didn't plan on a career in hospitality, but you found yourself in Adelaide cooking food influenced by your heritage and with great success. So what is it that you love about what you do?
Going back to what makes me change, which I remember having a bit of a frustration with what was happening with my international relations studies, and seeing what instant difference I could make on somebody by giving them a plate of food. That was a realization for me that that was something what I wanted to do. Seeing that face of happiness and satisfaction and enjoyment of people on the table while they were eating their meals, and talking to them. And I think that's been amazing on the process of getting to where we are. As I said, when I started the first El Estanco, on the first 6 months, I did everything. I served tables, I made coffee, I cooked their meals, and I put their meals on the tables as well as clear their plates. So I have that really connection with the customer and with the people that I was serving. And so just got to see that progression of them getting into my place, eating, enjoying it, sharing the experiences of how we did cook this. Or every now and then we used to just take them to the back of the restaurant where we have our wood fire oven and show them around and explain them how we got to cook that piece of meat that they were eating on the plate, and things like that. Just create this sense of satisfaction and enjoyment.
Well, Julian, we look forward to seeing what you do next. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today to share your story. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony, for having me. And yeah, can't wait.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.